It is a misty, secretive dawn in cinematic history, and somewhere between the smoky candlelit corners of London clubs and the menacing shadow play of Cold War Istanbul, a new kind of hero is forged. Not merely from Fleming's ink, but from celluloid, music, and an intoxicating atmosphere of elegant danger. From Russia with Love, the second James Bond film does not simply follow in the stylish footsteps of Dr. No. It expands the blueprint, and for many, becomes the high water mark of the entire franchise, intertwining rich source material, visual sophistication, and innovative storytelling, all harmonized within the anxieties and aspirations of the 1960s. To truly understand why this particular Bond film remains not just a fan favorite, but a critical touchstone, we must deconstruct its journey from page to screen, its mastery of suspense, the sophisticated magic of its visuals and sound, and finally, the deep impact of its performances and cultural legacy. Ian Fleming's From Russia with Love, published in 1957, was a sensation in its own right. A tautly paced tale of espionage, romance, and danger, set squarely in the charged atmosphere of the Cold War. At its core, Fleming's fifth Bond novel is built on the concept of a Western agent being deliberately ensnared in the intricate webs of Eastern and criminal machinations. The book received major acclaim, even landing on US President John F. Kennedy's list of favorite novels, which is often credited as an early catalyst for Bond's cinematic leap into iconic status. In the novel, British spy James Bond becomes a marked man targeted by the Soviet counterintelligence agency SMERSH. The enemy plots a honey trap, with Tatiana Romanova, an apparent Soviet defector, luring Bond to Istanbul, under the pretense of retrieving a cryptographic device, the Spectre. The major motifs revolve around the perils of seduction and seduction as weapon, and Bond's journey via the Orient Express, conveying not simply physical transition, but a passage through layers of duplicity and peril. Fleming, with the post-war loss of British influence weighing upon him, infused Bond with an existential wariness and nuanced vulnerability. The character's private moments, his idiosyncratic breakfast rituals, and flashes of self-doubt mark a shift towards psychological realism. These attributes travel with Bond into the film, albeit reconfigured for a more dramatic visual medium. The film adaptation, directed by Terence Young, emerges as an artful balance between fidelity to the novel and inventive deviation. The villains, for instance, are shifted from the real-world SMERSH to the fictional criminal syndicate Spectre, distancing the story from overt anti-Soviet politics and opening a more ambiguous field of menace. The infamous decoding device becomes the Lector, and Tatiana's arc is more intertwined with her unwitting role in Spectre's larger revenge scheme. Importantly, the adaptation preserves the essence, the sense of Bond being a pawn in an intricate chess match, the seductive ambiguity of Tatiana, and the unrelenting threat posed by Red Grant, a killer seemingly designed as Bond's dark double. From the earliest frames, the film signals its intent to break new ground. The now classic gun barrel opening and the shocking pre-title sequence, a murder in moonlit gardens, only to reveal the dead Bond is a masked decoy, announce a game of deception and identity that will run throughout the film. The narrative reshuffling, as orchestrated during the creative post-production process, brings us Bond himself much earlier than in Fleming's heads-down procedural, creating immediate intrigue and emotional investment. What elevates From Russia with Love from adaptation to classic is not just its careful attention to Fleming's pulse. Danger, sex, the seductive blurry border between love and manipulation, but its awareness of cinema as an art form. Structurally, visually, and sonically, it anticipates and advances the Bond formula that would soon become legend. It would be impossible to grasp the brilliance of From Russia with Love without paying tribute to its cast and the chemistry and menace they wrought on screen. This film is defined as much by performance as by script, score, or style. At the center, of course, stands Sean Connery, reprising Bond with an assurance, cool, and vulnerability not seen in the equally iconic but more comic Goldfinger. Critics and fans alike have long argued that this film features Connery's best turn as 007. He is confident without being invulnerable, suffused with a sense of real danger, and granted the opportunity to play off moments of genuine intimacy and self-doubt. Connery's command of the role was so profound that Fleming himself, initially skeptical of a working-class Scot as his elegant creation, is said to have retroactively woven Scottish heritage into Bond's backstory in subsequent novels. Here, Connery oscillates elegantly between ruthless agent and reluctant lover, demonstrating layers of humanity rarely permitted later in the series. Alongside Connery is Daniela Bianchi as Tatiana Romanova, the naive cipher clerk drawn into Spectre's deadly game. While her voice was dubbed by Barbara Jefford, Bianchi's physicality infuses Tatiana with innocence and resolve, capturing both the allure and the terror of a woman ensnared by forces she cannot control. Her chemistry with Connery is vital. Every encounter is charged with erotic tension, but also with mutual suspicion. Pedro Armendáriz' portrayal of Kerim Bey, Bond's Turkish ally, is another highlight. Filmed as Armendáriz was dying of cancer, his performance is suffused with warmth and vitality, but also pathos. Critics note the genuine friendship between Bond and Kerim, lending the story a rare emotional core. Armendáriz's scenes, especially those shared with Connery, are lauded for their depth and realism. His eventual death on the Orient Express resonates with a unique sincerity, making Bond's quest for vengeance both personal and poignant. Turning to the film's villains, Lotte Lenya as Rosa Klepp brings to life one of the most memorable antagonists in Bond lore. Lenya's anatomical angularity and icy ruthlessness, paired with hints of predatory sexual repression, render Klepp simultaneously camp and terrifying. Her climactic attack, famed for the poison-tipped shoe, is played not for grotesquerie, but for unstoppable menace, a signature moment of Bondian suspense. Robert Shaw's Red Grant is, if possible, even more iconic. Virtually silent until the third act, Shaw's performance is a study in predatory patience. His physical presence, blonde hair, square jaw, impassive eyes, marks him as Bond's double and shadow. When Grant at last confronts Bond on the train, the rivalry is more than physical, it is mythic. Two halves of the spy divided by chance, ideology and circumstance. The cumulative effect of these performances is to bring the film's psychological stakes into focus. Bond is not alone, nor invulnerable. Allies can die, lovers betray, and enemies anticipate his every move. The richness and complexity of these characters, each played with conviction and care, anchored the film in the real anxieties of its era and ensured its continued emotional resonance. To unravel how From Russia with Love keeps audiences on the edge of their seats, one must examine the screenplay's architecture. a textbook lesson in sustained suspense and narrative tension. The screenplay, composed with precision by Richard Maybaum and Joanna Harwood, is a masterclass in manipulating point of view and leveraging dramatic irony. Unlike many thrillers that restrict the audience to the protagonist's perspective, this film deliberately lets us see behind the curtain. From the outset, viewers are privy to the inner workings of Spectre. Kronstein's chessboard strategics, Rosa Klepp's clandestine recruitment of Tatiana, and the selection of Red Grant as Bond's would-be executioner. Through these early glimpses, suspense is not built through ignorance, but through anticipation. We know more than Bond. We see the trap forming, and are forced to watch as he slides closer, step by perilous step. This dramatic irony is the engine of tension. Tatiana Romanova, the apparent defector, is a tool of Spectre. Yet she herself is kept in the dark about the organization's true intentions. She believes she is working for her own government and sees Klebb as her superior. The screenplay, by showing Klebb's covert allegiance to Spectre, creates a complex interplay of truth and lies. Tatiana is both pawn and player, and the audience empathizes with her confusion and vulnerability. The film's three-act structure advances with inevitable, meticulous logic. The first act lays out the trap. Bond is assigned to Istanbul, the seductive allure of the Lector and Tatiana's supposed affection set against the backdrop of Spectre's ruthless preparations. The second act is about approach and entrapment. Bond's partnership with Kerim Bey, the rich atmosphere of Istanbul, and the gradual tightening of Spectre's noose. Each set piece, the gypsy camp, the booby-trapped hotel room, clandestine meetings in mosque and street, is laden with threat and the knowledge that surveillance is constant, intimacy fractured, and nothing is as it seems. It is in the film's third act, the Orient Express sequence, that the tension, patiently built, erupts. The claustrophobic spaces of the train cars become crucibles of trust and betrayals. Bond's world narrows, allies disappear, bodies accumulate, and Grant, the mute shadow, steps forth into the light. At the dinner table, the mild-mannered Captain Nash lets his mask slip, and the audience, finally united with Bond's point of view, experiences the full brunt of suspense as the inexorable showdown approaches. But the screenplay's sophistication is found in its refusal to provide easy answers. The film's denouement, helicopter chases, Venetian showdowns with Klebb, and Bond's ultimate triumph never completely dispels the sense of unease. Surviving one web, Bond, and by extension the viewer, remains wary of what the next game will bring. The perpetual distrust, the sense that no one is ever safe, ensures the suspense lingers even after the credits roll. Gliding from literary tension into visual artistry, From Russia with Love refines its suspenseful foundation with striking composition, inventive camera techniques, and a nuanced manipulation of light and shadow. Cinematographer Ted Moore, whose work on the film won the British Academy's BAFTA Award, proved instrumental in grounding Bond's larger-than-life world with grit, atmosphere, and texture. Director Terence Young's stated preference for wide shots and minimal close-ups reaps substantial rewards, placing characters within grand but threatening environments. As Bond traverses Istanbul, the frame often dwarfs him, the city's ancient domes and labyrinthine streets emphasizing his isolation amid looming unseen dangers. The camera lingers as Bond and Kareem move through bustling train stations, crowded markets, and cavernous relics, each space pulsating with potential peril. This sense of scale becomes a visual metaphor for the reach of Spectre, whose manipulations lurk behind every corner and shadow. The film's color palette and lighting scheme are equally vital. Scenes alternate between the sun-bleached colors of daytime Istanbul and the cold, hard chiaroscuro of night. Interiors, hotel rooms, train compartments, Spectre lairs drip with noirish tension. Camera movement, too, is very purposeful. Panoramic sweeps signal Bond's exposure. Stealthy dollies and handheld shots bring viewers into close quarters, building a sense of surveillance. The infamous fight sequence aboard the Orient Express eschews the triumphal bombast of later Bond bouts for raw proximity. The fight, often cited as one of the greatest in action cinema, is composed with relentless realism. The camera is locked in the train compartment, movements abrupt and kinetic, choreography brutal but believable. Each slam, choke, and scramble is felt with terrifying immediacy, reinforcing the idea that Bond is only a man, vulnerable and desperate. Editor Peter Hunt's crash-cutting technique, an accelerated montage of incomplete motions, amplifies the violence, refusing to allow the viewer repose until the fight's breathless conclusion. Not to be overlooked, the film's signature opening titles, designed by Robert Brownjohn, project credits onto the undulating body of a belly dancer. These flesh projections, dancing through color and shadow, are not just titillation, they become the film's visual thesis, symbolizing the distorted, refracted truths that character and audience chase throughout the story. The credits' legibility shifts as the body moves, the names surging and retreating, much like the information and allegiances in play. This sensual but elusive sequence encapsulates the tension between desire and danger that defines both Bond and the world he inhabits. Throughout, the film continually frames Bond within visual schemes that support suspense. Cornered in train compartments and hotel suites, these choices render him simultaneously heroic and trapped, both agent and target. The cumulative result is a movie that reveals and ruthlessly withholds just what it needs to at the perfect moment, always engaging the viewer's eyes as well as their nerves. If one element acts as the connective tissue binding the film's elegance, tension, and sensuality, it is the music, composed chiefly by John Barry, with a haunting title song by Lionel Bard performed by Matt Monro. The soundtrack is not mere ornament, it operates as a narrative voice, foreshadowing dangers and punctuating moments of love, violence, and seduction. Barry's score for From Russia with Love, his first complete Bond soundtrack, establishes themes and motifs that will echo throughout the franchise. But it is here they are most eagerly integrated with the film's pulse. The title song itself, From Russia with Love, is a minor key romance threaded with melancholy and intrigue. Elegant, but tinged with threat, its melody is woven throughout the film, shifting in orchestration as the drama unfolds. At its core, the theme is dualistic. At once, an invocation of romance and a warning of deceit. The music's true innovation comes in Barry's ability to tailor musical motifs to setting and action. Bond's arrival in Istanbul is scored with a brassy, percussive variation on the Bond theme that injects urgency, without resorting to bombast. The action cue 007, introduced here, employs rising brass fanfares and tight percussive assaults, creating an energetic counterpoint to Bond's more restrained, suspense-laden theme. These musical strategies prefigure the now standard Bond style of using distinct cues for intrigue, seduction, and action. Beyond melody, Barry's score is deeply textural. Syncopated bongos, muted trumpet blasts, and swirling strings evoke the exoticism and threat of the Eastern European setting, but also suggest the labyrinthine internal state of Bond himself. Likes and loves, threats and betrayals, all rendered musically. Moments between Bond and Tatiana gain a tender but restless string theme, signaling both intimacy and suspicion. In action scenes, sudden swells, tremolos, and staccato strikes accompany each narrative jolt, merging seamlessly into the editing's rhythm. In essence, Barry's score not only supports, but embodies the emotional truths of the story, dancing between love and danger with every measure. To understand From Russia with Love's abiding reputation as the best Bond film, one must consider not only its technical accomplishments, but its historical context and cultural impact. The film was conceived and released during the high drama of the Cold War, an era saturated with real-life espionage, paranoia, and the shifting sands of global power. Spy mania gripped the Western world, and cinematic espionage provided both release and catharsis for a public living under the shadow of nuclear anxiety. The success of Dr. No had signaled an appetite for the Bond myth, but From Russia with Love raised the stakes. It doubled the production budget, employed more sophisticated technology and set pieces, and, crucially, emphasized a globally attuned adult sensibility. The story's chessboard metaphors, Spectre's manipulation of East and West, and the calculated exploitation of sex, scandal, and media all resonated fiercely with contemporary realities. Audiences recognized not only the excitement of Bond's adventures, but the shadows of their own political moment. Surrounded by the Berlin Wall, the fallout from the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the ongoing revelations of double agents and defectors, this Bond was less cartoon superhero and more plausible survivor, a reflection of both Western fantasy and its underlying insecurities. The film's artistic innovations changed the rules of both Bond and action films in general. The pre-title sequence, invented during post-production to solve narrative challenges, became a signature feature of the franchise, influencing countless other series, from Mission Impossible to Indiana Jones. The realistic, close-up violence of the train fight set a new expectation for action choreography: gritty, physical, and authentic. The emphasis on plausible espionage, listening devices, hidden gadgets, betrayals, and surveillance grounded the film even as it flirted with sensationalism, setting a standard few would match. The visual and musical motifs, the sultry fractured credits, signature themes, pacing, and exotic tang set the template for an entire genre. But perhaps most instructive is how scholars, critics, and we, the audience, have responded over time. From Russia with Love is the definitive example of the genre, a confluence of British cinematic style, credible threat, and psychological sophistication. What distinguishes the film is not its gadgets or its girls, but its ability to maintain narrative and moral ambiguity, to keep Bond and the world he inhabits just a little darker, sexier, and less certain than in later, often more bombastic entries. Critical retrospectives reinforce this. The film appears on lists of the greatest British movies, is cited as a template by everyone from Quentin Tarantino to Steven Spielberg, and remains, even over 60 years on, the subject of debates about what makes a Bond film truly Bondian. From Russia with Love is the result not just of a formula, but of a fortuitous assembly of the right story, the right director, the right cast, and a cultural moment ripe for reinvention. Every element, screenplay, cinematography, score, performance, serves a larger unified vision to render Bond as both more vulnerable and more formidable, more real and more mythic than he had been before. The adaptation from Fleming's novel is less a pale shadow than a creative evolution, fusing the Cold War's psychological intricacies with escapism and spectacle. The screenplay's manipulation of point of view and dramatic irony not only generates vertiginous suspense, but invites viewers to dwell in uncertainty, questioning every motive and alliance. Ted Moore's cinematography erects a world of light and shadow, of vast spaces and confined dangers, in which Bond's most recognizably human traits, loneliness, lust, and pride, are as much liabilities as assets. John Barry's music is the perfect undercurrent. Lush, bracing, and at times heartbreakingly vulnerable, reminding us that even the greatest spy risks losing to his own heartbeats and desires. Direction by Terence Young and the purposeful, stylish editing of Peter Hunt bind these elements into a relentless but sophisticated whole, never sacrificing character for action, or vice versa. At its conclusion, From Russia with Love stands not just as a Bond film, but as a genre-defining work. A Cold War spy thriller that remains both a product of its time and ahead of it. Its influence is everywhere, in the DNA of every subsequent Bond film, in the aesthetics of the modern action thriller, and in the collective consciousness of cinema-goers, for whom the line between art and entertainment, between myth and realism, is best traversed by Bond, James Bond. The film's legacy is secured not simply through nostalgia or reverence, but because every viewing still poses questions about loyalty, trust, the cost of victory, and the ever-shifting line between hero and pawn. As we revisit From Russia with Love today, it continues to beckon us not as a fantasy, but as an invitation into a world of shadows, desires, and the shimmering, dangerous promise of the unknown. That, perhaps, is why From Russia with Love remains not only the best of Bond, but among the best in all of spy cinema. It is, at least, both art and artifact, a classic that never quite lets us escape its web.